days, and now you have forgotten it." He pulled himself up, and looked at her steadily with an air of grave reproof. Much abashed, she hastily substituted a very subdued uncle for the objectionable goosey, and the matter dropped. The principal anecdote on this occasion was about a dog which had been sent into the sea after sticks. He brought them back very properly for some time, and then there appeared to be a little difficulty, and he returned swimming in a very curious manner. On closer inspection it appeared that he had caught hold of his own tail by mistake, and was bringing it to land in triumph. This was told with the utmost gravity, and though we had been requested beforehand not to mention Lewis Carroll's books, the temptation was too strong. I could not help saying to the child next me, "That was like the whiting, wasn't it?" Our visitor, however, took up the remark, and seemed quite willing to talk about it. When I wrote that, he said, I believed that whiting really did have their tails in their mouths, but I have since been told that fishmongers put the tail through the eye, not in the mouth at all. He was not a very good carver, for Miss Bremer also describes a little difficulty he had, this time with the pastry. An amusing incident occurred when he was at lunch with us. He was requested to serve some pastry, and, using a knife, as it was evidently rather hard, the knife penetrated the d'oyley beneath, and his consternation was extreme when he saw the slice of linen and lace he served as an addition to the tart. It was, I think, through her connection with the Alice play that Mr. Dodgson first came to know Miss Isa Bowman. Her childish friendship for him was one of the joys of his later years, and one of the last letters he wrote was addressed to her. The poem at the beginning of Sylvie and Bruno is an acrostic on her name, "Is all our life, then, but a dream, seen faintly in the golden gleam athwart time's dark, resistless stream? Bowed to the earth with bitter woe, or laughing at some rare show, we flutter idly to and fro. Man's little day in haste we spend, and, from the merry noontide, send no glance to meet the silent end." Every one has heard of Lewis Carroll's hatred of interviewers. The following letter to Miss Manners makes one feel that in some cases, at least, his feeling was justifiable. "If your Manchester relatives ever go to the play, tell them they ought to see Isa as Cinderella. She is evidently a success. And she has actually been interviewed by one of those dreadful newspapers reporters, and the interview is published with her picture. And such rubbish he makes her talk. She tells him that something or other was tacitly conceded, and that I love to see a great actress give expression to the wonderful ideas of the immortal master. N.B. I never let her talk like that when she is with me." Mz recovered in time to go to America, with her mother and Isa and Nellie, and they all enjoyed the trip much, and Mz has a London engagement. Only once was an interviewer bold enough to enter Lewis Carroll's sanctum. The story has been told in The Guardian, the 19th of January, 1898, but will bear repetition. Not long ago Mr. Dodgson happened to get into correspondence with a man whom he had never seen, on some question of religious difficulty, and he invited him to come to his rooms and have a talk on the subject. When, therefore, a Mr. X, was announced to him one morning, he advanced to meet him with outstretched hand and smiles of welcome. "Come in, Mr. X, I have been expecting you." The delighted visitor thought this a promising beginning, and immediately pulled out a notebook and pencil, and proceeded to ask the usual questions. Great was Mr. Dodgson's disgust. Instead of his expected friend, here was another man of the same name, and one of the much dreaded interviewers, actually sitting in his chair. The mistake was soon explained, and the representative of the press was bowed out as quickly as he had come in. It was while Isa and one of her sisters were staying at Eastbourne that the visit to America was mooted. Mr. Dodgson suggested that it would be well for them to grow gradually accustomed to seafaring, and therefore proposed to take them by steamer to Hastings. This plan was carried out, and the weather was unspeakably bad, far worse than anything they experienced in their subsequent trip across the Atlantic. The two children, who were neither of them very good sailors, experienced sensations that were the reverse of pleasant. Mr. Dodgson did his best to console them, while he continually repeated, "Crossing the Atlantic will be much worse than this." However, even this terrible lesson on the horrors of the sea did not act as a deterrent. It was as unsuccessful as the effort of the old lady in one of his stories. An old lady I once knew tried to check the military ardor of a little boy by showing him a picture of a battlefield, and describing some of its horrors. But the only answer she got was, "I'll be a soldier." "Tell it again." The Bowman children sometimes came over to visit him at Oxford, and he used to delight in showing them over the colleges, and pointing out the famous people whom they encountered. On one of these occasions he was walking with Maggie, then a mere child, when they met the Bishop of Oxford, to whom Mr. Dodgson introduced his little guest. His lordship asked her what she thought of Oxford. "I think," said the little actress, with quite a professional aplomb, "it's the best place in the provinces." At which the bishop was much amused. After the child had returned to town, the bishop sent her a copy of a little book called Golden Dust, inscribed from W. Oxon, which considerably mystified her, as she knew nobody of that name. Another little stage friend of Lewis Carroll's was Miss Vera Beringer, the little Lord Fauntleroy whose acting delighted all theatre-goers 8 or 9 years ago. Once, when she was spending a holiday in the Isle of Man, he sent her the following lines: "There was a young lady of station, I love man was her sole exclamation, but when men cried, you flatter, she replied, oh, no matter, Isle of Man is the true explanation." Many of his friendships with children began in a railway carriage, for he always took about with him a stock of puzzles when he travelled, to amuse any little companions whom chance might send him. Once he was in a carriage with a lady and her little daughter, both complete strangers to him. The child was reading Alice in Wonderland, and when she put her book down, he began talking to her about it. The mother soon joined in the conversation, of course without the least idea who the stranger was with whom she was talking. "Isn't it sad," she said, "about poor Mr. Lewis Carroll? He's gone mad, you know." "Indeed," replied Mr. Dodgson, "I had never heard that." I assure you it is quite true, the lady answered. I have it on the best authority. Before Mr. Dodgson parted with her, he obtained her leave to send a present to the little girl, and a few days afterwards she received a copy of Through the Looking Glass inscribed with her name, and from the author, in memory of a pleasant journey. When he gave books to children, he very often wrote acrostics on their names on the flyleaf. One of the prettiest was inscribed in a copy of Miss Young's Little Lucy's Wonderful Globe, which he gave to Miss Ruth Dimms. Around the wondrous globe I wander wild, up and downhill, age succeeds to youth, toiling all in vain to find a child elf so loving, half so dear as Ruth. In another book, given to her sister Margaret, he wrote, maidens, if a maid you meet always free from pout and pet, ed smile and temper sweet, read my little Margaret. And if loved by all she be rightly, not a pampered pet, easily you then may see tease my little Margaret. Here are 2 letters to children, the one interesting as a specimen of pure nonsense of the sort which children always like, the other as showing his dislike of being praised. The first was written to Miss Gertrude Atkinson, daughter of an old college friend, but otherwise unknown to Lewis Carroll except by her photograph. My dear Gertrude, so many things have happened since we met last. Really I don't know which to begin talking about. For instance, England has been conquered by William the Conqueror. We haven't met since that happened, you know. How did you like it? Were you frightened? And one more thing has happened, I have got your photograph. Thank you very much for it. I like it awfully. Do they let you say awfully? Or do they say, no, my dear, little girls mustn't say awfully, they should say very much indeed. I wonder if you will ever get as far as Jersey. If not, how are we to meet? Your affectionate friend, C.L. Dodgson. From the second letter, to Miss Florence Jackson, I take the following extract. I have 2 reasons for sending you this fable. One is, that in a letter you wrote me you said something about my being clever, and the other is that, when you wrote again you said it again. And each time I thought, really, I must write and ask her not to say such things. It is not wholesome reading for me. The fable is this. The cold, frosty, bracing air is the treatment one gets from the world generally, such as contempt, or blame, or neglect, all those are very wholesome. And the hot dry air, that you breathe when you rush to the fire, is the praise that one gets from one's young, happy, rosy, I may even say florid friends. And that's very bad for me, and gives pride fever, and conceit cough, and such like diseases. Now I'm sure you don't want me to be laid up with all these diseases, so please don't praise me any more. The verses to Matilda Jane certainly deserve a place in this chapter. To make their meaning clear, I must state that Lewis Carroll wrote them for a little cousin of his, and that Matilda Jane was the somewhat prosaic name of her doll. The poem expresses finely the blind, unreasoning devotion which the infant mind professes for inanimate objects. Matilda Jane, you never look at any toy or picture book, I show you pretty things in vain. You must be blind, Matilda Jane. I ask you riddles, tell you tales, but all our conversation fails. You never answer me again, I fear you're dumb, Matilda Jane. Matilda, darling, when I call you never seem to hear at all. I shout with all my might and main, but you're so deaf, Matilda Jane. Matilda Jane, you needn't mind, for though you're deaf, and dumb, and blind, there's someone loves you, it is plain, and that is me, Matilda Jane. In an earlier chapter I gave some of Mr. Dodgson's letters to Miss Edith Ricks. The two which follow, being largely about children, seem more appropriate here. My dear Edith, would you tell your mother I was aghast at seeing the address of her letter to me, and I would much prefer Reverend C. L. Dodgson, Chapter, Oxford. When a letter comes addressed Lewis Carroll, Chapter, it either goes to the dead letter office, or it impresses on the minds of all letter carriers, and see, through whose hands it goes, the very fact I least want them to know. Please offer to your sister all the necessary apologies for the liberty I have taken with her name. My only excuse is, that I know no other, and how am I to guess what the full name is? It may be Carlotta, or Zealot, or Ballot, or Lotus Blossom, a very pretty name, or even Charlotte. Never have I sent anything to a young lady of whom I have a more shadowy idea. Name, an enigma, age, somewhere between 1 and 19. You've no idea how bewildering it is, alternately picturing her as a little toddling thing of 5, and a tall girl of 15. Disposition, well, I have a fragment of information on that question. Your mother says, as to my coming, it must be when Lottie is at home, or she would never forgive us. Still, I cannot consider the mere fact that she is of an unforgiving disposition as a complete view of her character. I feel sure she has some other qualities besides. Believe me, yours affectionately, C. L. Dodgson. My dear child, it seems quite within the bounds of possibility, if we go on long in this style, that our correspondence may at last assume a really friendly tone. I don't of course say it will actually do so, that would be too bold a prophecy, but only that it may tend to shape itself in that direction. Your remark, that slippers for elephants could be made, only they would not be slippers, but boots, convinces me that there is a branch of your family in Ireland who are, oh dear, I am going distracted. There's a lady in the opposite house who simply sings all day. All her songs are wails, and their tunes, such as they have, are much the same. She has one strong note in her voice, and she knows it. I think it's a natural, but I haven't much ear. And when she gets to that note, she howls. The oryxes, I suppose. About your uninteresting neighbors, I sympathize with you much, but oh, I wish I had you here, that I might teach you not to say it is difficult to visit one's district regularly, like everyone else does. And now I come to the most interesting part of your letter. May you treat me as a perfect friend, and write anything you like to me, and ask my advice. Why, of course you may, my child. What else am I good for? But oh, my dear child friend, you cannot guess how such words sound to me. That anyone should look up to me, or think of asking my advice, well, it makes one feel humble, I think, rather than proud. Humble to remember, while others think so well of me, what I really am, in myself. Thou, that teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Well, I won't talk about myself, it is not a healthy topic. Perhaps it may be true of any two people, that, if one could see the other through and through, love would perish. I don't know. Anyhow, I like to have the love of my child friends, though I know I don't deserve it. Please write as freely as ever you like. I went up to town and fetched Phoebe down here on Friday in last week, and we spent most of Saturday upon the beach, Phoebe wading and digging, and as happy as a bird upon the wing, to quote the song she sang when first I saw her. Tuesday evening brought a telegram to say she was wanted at the theatre next morning. So, instead of going to bed, Phoebe packed her things, and we left by the last train, reaching her home by 1:45 a.m. However, even 4 days of sea air, and a new kind of happiness, did her good, I think. I am rather lonely now she is gone. She is a very sweet child, and a thoughtful child, too. It was very touching to see. We had a little Bible reading every day. I tried to remember that my little friend had a soul to be cared for, as well as a body. The faraway look in her eyes, when we talked of God and of heaven, as if her angel, who beholds his face continually, were whispering to her. Of course, there isn't much companionship possible, after all, between an old man's mind and a little child's, but what there is sweet, and wholesome, I think. 430.png 431.png Facsimile of a looking-glass letter from Lewis Carroll to Miss Edith Ball. 3 letters of his to a child friend, Miss Kathleen Ischwege, now Mrs. Round, illustrate one of those friendships which endure, the sort of friendship that he always longed for, and so often failed to secure. Chapter, Oxford, the 24th of October, 1879. My dear Kathleen, I was really pleased to get your letter, as I had quite supposed I should never see or hear of you again. You see, I knew only your Christian name, not the ghost of a surname, or the shadow of an address, and I was not prepared to spend my little all in advertisements. If the young lady, who was travelling on the GW railway, and or to devote the remainder of my life to going about repeating Kathleen like that young woman who came from some foreign land to look for her lover, but only knew that he was called Edward, or Richard was it? I dare say you know history better than I do, and that he lived in England, so that naturally it took her some time to find him. All I knew was that you could, if you chose, write to me through Macmillan, but it is 3 months since we met, so I was not expecting it, and it was a pleasant surprise. Well, so I hope I may now count you as one of my child friends. I am fond of children, except boys, and have more child friends than I could possibly count on my fingers, even if I were a centipede. By the way, have they fingers? I'm afraid they are only feet, but, of course, they use them for the same purpose, and that is why no other insects, except centipedes, ever succeed in doing long multiplication, and I have several not so very far from you, one at Beckenham, two at Balham, two at Herne Hill, one at Peckham, so there is every chance of my being somewhere near you before the year 1979. If so, may I call? I am very sorry your neck is no better, and I wish they would take you to Margate. Margate air will make anybody well of anything. It seems you have already got my 2 books about Alice. Have you also got The Hunting of the Snook? If not, I should be very glad to send you one. The pictures, by Mr. Holliday, are pretty, and you needn't read the verses unless you like. How do you pronounce your surname? Esquige. Or how? Is it a German name? If you can do doublets with how many links do you turn Kath into Lean? With kind remembrances to your mother, I am your affectionate friend, Charles L. Dodgson, alias Lewis Carroll. Chapter, Oxford, the 20th of January, 1892. My dear Kathleen, some months ago I heard, from my cousin, May Wilcox, that you were engaged to be married. And, ever since, I have cherished the intention of writing to offer my congratulations. Some might say, why not write at once? To such unreasoning creatures, the obvious reply is, when you have bottled some peculiarly fine port, do you usually begin to drink it at once? Is not that a beautiful simile? Of course, I need not remark that my congratulations are like fine old port, only finer, and older. Accept, my dear old friend, my heartiest wishes for happiness, of all sorts and sizes, for yourself, and for him whom you have chosen as your other self. And may you love one another with a love second only to your love for God, a love that will last through bright days and dark days, in sickness and in health, through life and through death. A few years ago I went, in the course of about 3 months, to the weddings of 3 of my old child friends. But weddings are not very exhilarating scenes for a miserable old bachelor, and I think you'll have to excuse me from attending yours. However, I have so far concerned myself in it that I actually dreamed about it a few nights ago. I dreamed that you had had a photograph done of the wedding party, and had sent me a copy of it. At one side stood a group of ladies, among whom I made out the faces of Dolly and Ninty, and in the foreground, seated in a boat, were 2 people, a gentleman and a lady I think. Could they have been the bridegroom and the bride, engaged in the natural and usual occupation for a riverside picnic, pulling a Christmas cracker? I have no idea what put such an idea into my head. I never saw crackers used in such a scene. I hope your mother goes on well. With kindest regards to her and your father, and love to your sisters, and to yourself too, if he doesn't object, I am, yours affectionately, C. L. Dodgson. P.S. I never give wedding presents, so please regard the enclosed as an unwedding present. Chapter, Oxford, the 8th of December, 1897. My dear Kathleen, many thanks for the photo of yourself and your fiancé, which duly reached me the 23rd of January, 1892. Also for a wedding card, which reached me the 28th of August, 1892. Neither of these favors, I fear, was ever acknowledged. Our only communication since has been that on the 13th of December, 1892, I sent you a biscuit box adorned with looking-glass pictures. This you never acknowledged, so I was properly served for my negligence. I hope your little daughter, of whose arrival Mrs. Ischwege told me in December, 1893, has been behaving well. How quickly the years slip by. It seems only yesterday that I met, on the railway, a little girl who was taking a sketch of Oxford. Your affectionate old friend, C.L. Dodgson. The following verses were inscribed in a copy of Alice's Adventures presented to the 3 Miss Drurys in August, 1869, to 3 puzzled little girls, from the author. 3 little maidens weary of the rail, 3 pairs of little ears listening to a tale, 3 little hands held out in readiness, for 3 little puzzles very hard to guess. 3 pairs of little eyes, open wonder-wide, at 3 little scissors lying side by side. 3 little mouths that thanked an unknown friend, for 1 little book he undertook to send. Though whether they'll remember a friend, or book, or day, in 3 little weeks is very hard to say. He took the same 3 children to German Reed's entertainment, where the triple bill consisted of Happy Arcadia All Abroad and Very Catching. A few days afterwards he sent them Phantasmagoria with a little poem on the flyleaf to remind them of their treat, 3 little maids, one winter day, while others went to feed, to sing, to laugh, to dance, to play. More wisely went to read. Others, when lesson times begun, go, half inclined to cry, some in a walk, some in a run, but these went in a fly. I give to other little maids a smile, a kiss, a look, presents whose memory quickly fades. I give to these a book. Happy Arcadia may blind, while all abroad, their eyes, at home, this book, I trust, they'll find a very catching prize. The next 3 letters were addressed to 2 of Mr. Arthur Hughes' children. They are good examples of the wild and delightful nonsense with which Lewis Carroll used to amuse his little friends. My dear Agnes, you lazy thing. What? I'm to divide the kisses myself, am I? Indeed I won't take the trouble to do anything of the sort. But I'll tell you how to do it. First, you must take 4 of the kisses, and that reminds me of a very curious thing that happened to me at 4:30 yesterday. 3 visitors came knocking at my door, begging me to let them in. And when I opened the door, who do you think they were? You'll never guess. Why, they were 3 cats. Wasn't it curious? However, they all looked so cross and disagreeable that I took up the first thing I could lay my hand on, which happened to be the rolling pin, and knocked them all down as flat as pancakes. If you come knocking at my door, I said, I shall come knocking at your heads. That was fair, wasn't it? Yours affectionately, Lewis Carroll. My dear Agnes, about the cats, you know. Of course I didn't leave them lying flat on the ground like dried flowers. No, I picked them up, and I was as kind as I could be to them. I lent them the portfolio for a bed. They wouldn't have been comfortable in a real bed, you know, they were too thin, but they were quite happy between the sheets of blotting paper, and each of them had a pen wiper for a pillow. Well, then I went to bed, but first I lent them the 3 dinner bells, to ring if they wanted anything in the night. You know I have 3 dinner bells. The first, which is the largest, is rung when dinner is nearly ready. The second, which is rather larger, is rung when it is quite ready, and the third, which is as large as the other 2 put together, is rung all the time I am at dinner. Well, I told them they might ring if they happened to want anything, and, as they rang all the bells all night, I suppose they did want something or other, only I was too sleepy to attend to them. In the morning I gave them some rat-tail jelly and buttered mice for breakfast, and they were as discontented as they could be. They wanted some boiled pelican, but of course I knew it wouldn't be good for them. So all I said was go to number 2, Finborough Road, and ask for Agnes Hughes, and if it's really good for you, she'll give you some. Then I shook hands with them all, and wished them all goodbye, and drove them up the chimney. They seemed very sorry to go, and they took the bells and the portfolio with them. I didn't find this out till after they had gone, and then I was sorry too, and wished for them back again. What do I mean by them? Never mind. How are Arthur, and Amy, and Emily? Do they still go up and down Finborough Road, and teach the cats to be kind to mice? I'm very fond of all the cats in Finborough Road. Give them my love. Who do I mean by them? Never mind. Your affectionate friend, Lewis Carroll. 521.png Arthur Hughes and his daughter Agnes. From a photograph by Lewis Carroll. My dear Amy, how are you getting on, I wonder, with guessing those puzzles from Wonderland? If you think you've found out any of the answers, you may send them to me, and if they're wrong, I won't tell you they're right. You asked me after those 3 cats. Ah, the dear creatures. Do you know, ever since that night they first came, they have never left me. Isn't it kind of them? Tell Agnes this. She will be interested to hear it. And they are so kind and thoughtful. Do you know, when I had gone out for a walk the other day, they got all my books out of the bookcase, and opened them on the floor, to be ready for me to read. They opened them all at page 50, because they thought that would be a nice useful page to begin at. It was rather unfortunate, though, because they took my bottle of gum, and tried to gum pictures upon the ceiling, which they thought would please me, and by accident they spilt a quantity of it all over the books. So when they were shut up and put by, the leaves all stuck together, and I can never read page 50 again in any of them. However, they meant it very kindly, so I wasn't angry. I gave them each a spoonful of ink as a treat, but they were ungrateful for that, and made dreadful faces. But, of course, as it was given them as a treat, they had to drink it. One of them has turned black since, it was a white cat to begin with. Give my love to any children you happen to meet. Also I send 2 kisses and a half, for you to divide with Agnes, Emily, and Godfrey. Mind you divide them fairly. Yours affectionately, C.L. Dodgson. The intelligent reader will make a discovery about the first of the 2 following letters, which Miss Maggie Cunningham, the child friend to whom both were addressed, perhaps did not hit upon at once. Mr. Dodgson wrote these 2 letters in 1868. Dear Maggie, I found that the friend, that the little girl asked me to write to, lived at Ripon, and not at Land's End, a nice sort of place to invite to. It looked rather suspicious to me, and soon after, by dint of incessant inquiries, I found out that she was called Maggie, and lived in a crescent. Of course I declared, after that, the language I used doesn't matter, I will not address her, that's flat. So do not expect me to flatter. Well, I hope you will soon see your beloved Pa come back, for consider, should you be quite content with only Jack? Just suppose they made a blunder. Such things happen now and then. Really, now, I shouldn't wonder if your John came home again, and your father stayed at school. A most awkward thing, no doubt. How would you receive him? You'll say, perhaps, you'd turn him out. That would answer well, so far as concerns the boy, you know, but consider your papa, learning lessons in a row of great inky schoolboys. This, though unlikely, might occur. Harley would be grieved to miss him, don't mention it to her. No cart has yet been done of me, that does real justice to my smile, and so I hardly like, you see, to send you one. However, I'll consider if I will or not. Meanwhile, I send a little thing to give you an idea of what I look like when I'm lecturing. The merest sketch, you will allow, yet still I think there's something grand in the expression of the brow and in the action of the hand. Have you read my fairy tale in Aunt Judy's magazine? If you have, you will not fail to discover what I mean when I say Bruno yesterday came to remind me that he was my godson. On the ground that I gave him a name. Your affectionate friend, C.L. Dodgson. P.S. I would send, if I were not too shy, the same message to Harley that she, though I do not deserve it, not I, has sent through her sister to me. My best love to yourself, to your mother my kindest regards, to your small, fat, impertinent, ignorant brother my hatred. I think that is all. 441.png What I look like when I'm lecturing. From a drawing by Lewis Carroll. My dear Maggie, I am a very bad correspondent, I fear, but I hope you won't leave off writing to me on that account. I got the little book safe, and will do my best about putting my name in, if I can only manage to remember what day my birthday is, but one forgets these things so easily. Somebody told me, a little bird, I suppose, that you had been having better photographs done of yourselves. If so, I hope you will let me buy copies. Fanny will pay you for them. But, oh Maggie, how can you ask for a better one of me than the one I sent? It is one of the best ever done. such grace, such dignity, such benevolence, such, as a great secret. Please don't repeat it. The Queen sent to ask for a copy of it, but as it is against my rule to give in such a case, I was obliged to answer, Mr. Dodgson presents his compliments to Her Majesty, and regrets to say that his rule is never to give his photograph except to young ladies. I am told she was annoyed about it, and said, I'm not so old as all that comes to, and one doesn't like to annoy queens, but really I couldn't help it, you know. I will conclude this chapter with some reminiscences of Lewis Carroll, which have been kindly sent me by an old child friend of his, Mrs. Maitland, daughter of the late Reverend E. A. Lytton, rector of Naunton, and formerly Fellow of Oriel College and Vice Principal of St. Edmund's Hall. To my mind Oxford will be never quite the same again now that so many of the dear old friends of one's childhood have gone over to the great majority. Often, in the twilight, when the flickering firelight danced on the old wainscoted wall, have we, father and I, chatted over the old Oxford days and friends, and the merry times we all had together in Long Wall Street. I was a nervous, thin, remarkably ugly child then, and for some years I was left almost entirely to the care of Mary Pearson, my own particular attendant. I first remember Mr. Dodgson when I was about 7 years old, and from that time until we went to live in Gloucestershire he was one of my most delightful friends. I shall never forget how Mr. Dodgson and I sat once under a dear old tree in the Botanical Gardens, and how he told me, for the first time, Hans Andersen's story of the ugly duckling. I cannot explain the charm of Mr. Dodgson's way of telling stories. As he spoke, the characters seemed to be real flesh and blood. This particular story made a great impression upon me, and interested me greatly, as I was very sensitive about my ugly little self. I remember his impressing upon me that it was better to be good and truthful and to try not to think of oneself than to be a pretty, selfish child, spoiled and disagreeable, and, after telling me this story, he gave me the name of Ducky. Never mind, little Ducky, he used often to say, perhaps some day you will turn out a swan. I always attribute my love for animals to the teaching of Mr. Dodgson, his stories about them, his knowledge of their lives and histories. His enthusiasm about birds and butterflies enlivened many a dull hour. The monkeys in the Botanical Gardens were our special pets, and when we fed them with nuts and biscuits he seemed to enjoy the fun as much as I did. Every day my nurse and I used to take a walk in Christ Church Meadows, and often we would sit down on the soft grass, with the dear old broad walk quite close, and, when we raised our eyes, Merton College, with its walls covered with Virginian creeper. And how delighted we used to be to see the well-known figure in cap and gown coming, so swiftly, with his kind smile ready to welcome the ugly duckling. I knew, as he sat beside me, that a book of fairy tales was hidden in his pocket, or that he would have some new game or puzzle to show me, and he would gravely accept a tiny daisy bouquet for his coat with as much courtesy as if it had been the finest hothouse boutonniere. 2 or 3 times I went fishing with him from the bank near the old mill, opposite Addison's Walk, and he quite entered into my happiness when a small fish came wriggling up at the end of my bent pin, just ready for the dinner of the little white kitten Lily which he had given me. My hair was a great trouble to me, as a child, for it would tangle, and Mary was not too patient with me, as I twisted about while she was trying to dress it. One day I received a long blue envelope addressed to myself, which contained a story letter, full of drawings, from Mr. Dodgson. The first picture was of a little girl, with her hat off and her tumbled hair very much in evidence, asleep on a rustic bench under a big tree by the riverside, and two birds, holding what was evidently a very important conversation, above in the branches, their heads on one side, eyeing the sleeping child. Then there was a picture of the birds flying up to the child with twigs and straw in their beaks, preparing to build their nest in her hair. Next came the awakening, with the nest completed, and the mother bird sitting on it, while the father bird flew round the frightened child. And then, lastly, hundreds of birds, the air thick with them, the child fleeing, small boys with tin trumpets raised to their lips to add to the confusion, and Mary, armed with a basket of brushes and combs, bringing up the rear. After this, whenever I was restive while my hair was being arranged, Mary would show me the picture of the child with the nest on her head, and I at once became as quiet as a lamb. I had a daily governess, a dear old soul, who used to come every morning to teach me. I disliked particularly the large, lettered copies which she used to set me, and as I confided this to Mr. Dodgson, he came and gave me some copies himself. The only ones which I can remember were Patience and Watergrill Cure Gout. I always wondered what gout might be, and Little Girls Should Be Seen and Not Heard, which I thought unkind. These were written many times over, and I had to present the pages to him, without one blot or smudge, at the end of the week. One of the fellows of Magdalen College at that time was a Mr. Saul, a friend of my father's and of Mr. Dodgson, and a great lover of music. His rooms were full of musical instruments of every sort. Mr. Dodgson and father and I all went one afternoon to pay him a visit. At that time he was much interested in the big drum, and we found him when we arrived in full practice, with his music book open before him. He made us all join in the concert. Father undertook the cello, and Mr. Dodgson hunted up a comb and some paper, and, amidst much fun and laughter, the walls echoed with the finished roll, or shake, of the big drum, a roll that was Mr. Saul's delight. My father died on the 27th of August, 1897, and Mr. Dodgson on the 14th of January, 1898. And we, who are left behind in this cold, weary world, can only hope we may some day meet them again. Till then, oh, Father, and my dear old childhood's friend, requiescalis in pace. Bibliography notes on the first two books of Euclid. 1860 Oxford, Parker. 806D photographs. 1860, printed for private circulation, a list of negatives taken by the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. pp. 4 to a syllabus of plain algebraical geometry 1860 systematically arranged, with formal definitions, Postulates, and Axioms. By Charles Stuart Dodgson. Part I containing points, right lines, rectilinear figures, pencils and circles. Oxford, Parker. pp 16 plus 164, 8vo. Cloth, paper label. 5S Rules for Court Circular. 1860, a new game, invented by the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. pp 4. Reprinted in 1862. The Formulae of Plane Trigonometry 1861, printed with symbols, instead of words, to express the goniometrical ratios. By Charles Stuart Dodgson. Oxford, Parker. pp 19, 4-2. Stitched, 1s. Notes on the first part of Algebra. 1861 Oxford, Parker. 8vo 6d Index to In Memoriam. 1862, suggested and edited by the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. Much of the actual work of compilation was done by his sisters, London, Moxon. The Enunciations of Euclid, Books I and II. 1863 Oxford, printed at the University Press. General List of Mathematical Subjects, and 1863 Cycle for Working Examples. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Croquet Castles. 1863, a new game invented by the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. London. pp 4. Reprinted, with additions and alterations, in 1866 at Oxford. The New Examination Statute. 1864, a letter to the Vice-Chancellor. pp 2, 4-2. Oxford. A Guide to the Mathematical Student in Reading, 1864, Reviewing, and Working Examples. By Charles Stuart Dodgson. Part I Pure Mathematics. Oxford, Parker. 2 leaves and pp. 27, 8vo. Stitched, 1s. The Dynamics of a Particle, with an excursus on 1865, the new method of evaluation as applied to pi. Oxford, Vincent. pp 28, 8vo. 3 editions. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. By Lewis, 1865. Carroll, with 42 illustrations by John Tenniel. London, Macmillan. pp 192, cr. 8vo Cloth, gilt edges. 6s. The first edition, recalled, was printed in Oxford, and is very rare. All subsequent editions, 1865 onwards, by Richard Clay in London. Now in its 86,000. People's Edition, price 2s6d. First published in 1887. Now in its 70,000. Condensation of determinants, being a new and 1866 brief method for computing their arithmetical values. By the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. From the Proceedings of the Royal Society, No. 84, 1866. London, Taylor and Francis. pp 8, 8vo. An Elementary Treatise on Determinants. 1867 London, Macmillan. Printed in Oxford. pp 8 plus 143, 42. Cloth. 10s6d. The Fifth Book of Euclid treated algebraically, 1868 so far as it relates to commensurable magnitudes. With notes. By Charles L. Dodgson. Oxford and London, Parker. 2 leaves and pp. 37, 8vo. In wrapper, 1s. 6d Algebraical formulae for responsions. 1868 Oxford, printed at the University Press. The Telegraph Cipher. 1868, invented, in 1868, by the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. Phantasmagoria and Other Poems. 1869 by Lewis Carroll. London, Macmillan. Printed in Oxford. pp 8 plus 202, small 8vo. Cloth, gilt edges. Aventures d'Alice or Pays de Merveilles. 1869 par Lewis Carroll, ouvrage illustré de 42 vignettes par John Tenniel. Traduit de l'anglais, par H. Pway. London, Macmillan. pp 196, cr. 8vo cloth, gilt edges. 6s, now in its second thousand. Alice Abentur im Wunderland. Von Lewis 1869 Carroll, MITs wie und Vierzig Illustrationen von John Tenniel. Übersetzt von Antoni Zimmermann. London, Macmillan. pp 178, cr. 8vo cloth, gilt edges. 6s. Gazette Extraordinary. 1870 Oxford, printed at the University Press. Algebraical Formulae and Rules. 1870 Oxford, printed at the University Press. Arithmetical Formulae and Rules. 1870 Oxford, printed at the University Press. To all child readers of Alice's Adventures in 1871 Wonderland. pp 4 Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found 1871 There. By Lewis Carroll. With 50 illustrations by John Tenniel. London, Macmillan. pp 224, cr. 8vo cloth, gilt edges. 6s now in its 61st thousand, People's Edition. Price 2s. 6d first published in 1887. Now in its 46th thousand. L'Aventure d'Alice nel Pays de la Meraviglie. 1872 per Lewis Carroll. Traduct dall'inglese the T. Pietrocola Rossetti. Con 42 vignettes di Giovanni Tenniel. London, Macmillan. pp 189, cr. 8vo cloth, gilt edges. 6s. Circular to hospitals offering copies of the two 1872 Alice books. London, Macmillan. Symbols, and c. To be used in Euclid, 1872 books I and II. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Number of propositions in Euclid. Oxford, 1872, printed at the University Press. The New Belfry of Christ Church, Oxford. A 1872 monograph. By D.C.L. Oxford, Parker. pp 2+31, cr. 8 vo in wrapper. 6d, 5 editions. Enunciations, Euclid, I.6. 1873, Oxford, printed at the University Press. Objections, submitted to the governing body of 1873 Christ Church, Oxford, against certain proposed alterations in the Great Quadrangle. Oxford, printed at the University Press. pp 4-42. Printed for private circulation. The Vision of the Three Ts. A Threnody. By the 1873 author of the New Belfry. Oxford. Parker. pp 37+3, 8 vo. In wrapper, 9d. 3 editions. A discussion of the various modes of procedure in 1873 conducting elections. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Euclid, Book V, proved algebraically, so far as 1874 it relates to commensurable magnitudes, to which is prefixed a summary of all the necessary algebraical operations, arranged in order of difficulty. By Charles L. Dodgson. Oxford, Parker. pp 8+62, 8 vo. Cloth. 3s6d. Suggestions as to the best method of taking votes, 1874, where more than 2 issues are to be voted on. Oxford, Hall and Stacey. pp 8 vo. The Blank Check. A Fable. By the author of the 1874 New Belfry and the Vision of the Three Ts. Oxford, Parker. pp 14+2, cr. 8 vo. In wrapper. 4d. Preliminary Algebra, and Euclid, Book V. 1874, Oxford, printed at the University Press. The Dynamics of a Particle. 1874, Oxford, Parker. pp 24, cr. 8 vo. In wrapper. 6d. The New Method of Evaluation as Applied to Pi. 1874, Oxford, Parker. pp 16, cr. 8 vo. In wrapper. 4d. Facts, Figures, and Fancies relating to the 1874 elections to the Hebdomadal Council, the offer of the Clarendon trustees, and the proposal to convert the parks into crick grounds. Oxford, Parker. pp 29+3, cr. 8 vo. In wrapper. 8d. Notes by an Oxfordshire. 1874, Oxford, Parker. cr. 8 vo. Cloth, Gilt Edges. This book consists of the following 6 pamphlets bound together: The New Method of Evaluation, The Dynamics of a Particle, Facts, Figures, and Fancies, The New Belfry, The Vision of the Three Ts, and The Blank Check. Examples in Arithmetic. 1874, Oxford, printed at the University Press. Euclid, Books I and II. Edited by Charles L. 1875 Dodgson. Oxford, Parker. Diagram, title, preface, and pp. 102, cr. 8vo cloth. The book was circulated privately among mathematical friends for hints. Not yet published, was printed above title. The Professorship of Comparative Philology. 1876, 3 leaflets. Oxford, printed at the University Press. A method of taking votes of more than 2 1876 issues. Oxford, printed at the University Press. pp 20, cr. 8vo. A note on the title page runs as follows: as I hope to investigate this subject further, and to publish a more complete pamphlet on the subject, I shall feel greatly obliged if you will enter in this copy any remarks that occur to you, and return it to me any time before. Letter and Questions to Hospitals. Oxford, 1876, printed at the University Press. An Easter Greeting. Reprinted in London, by 1876 Macmillan and Company, in 1880. Fame's Penny Trumpet. Not published. 1876 Oxford, Baxter. pp 4-42. Afterwards published in Rhyme and Reason. The Hunting of the Snook. An Agony, in 1876 Fits. By Lewis Carroll. With 9 illustrations by Henry Holliday. London, Macmillan. pp 11 + 83, 8vo. Cloth, gilt edges. 4s6d. The Responsions of Hilary Term, 1877. 1877, A Letter to the Vice-Chancellor. Oxford, printed at the University Press. A Charade. Written with a cyclostyle. pp 4. 1878 Word Links. A Game, afterwards called 1878 Doublets, invented by the Reverend C. L. Dodgson. Oxford, printed at the University Press. pp 4, 8vo. There is also a form written with a cyclostyle. Doublets. A Word Puzzle. By Lewis Carroll. 1879 London, Macmillan. pp 73, 8vo. Cloth. 2s, 2nd edition, 1880. Euclid and His Modern Rivals. 1879 London, Macmillan. 8vo. Cloth. 6s, 2nd edition, 1885. pp xc +275. Doublets. A Word Puzzle. By Lewis Carroll. 1880 Oxford, printed at the University Press. pp 8. 8vo. This puzzle appeared in Vanity Fair, the 19th of April, 1879. Letter from Mabel to Emily. To illustrate common 1880 errors in letter writing. Written with a cyclostyle. Les Aventures in Het Wonderland. 1881 na Het Engelsk. A Dutch version of Alice in Wonderland. Nijmegen. 4-2. On Catching Cold. A pamphlet, consisting of 1881 extracts from 2 books by Dr. Inman. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Jabberwocky. Lewis Carroll's poem, with a 1881 Vansittart's Latin rendering. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Notice reconcordance to In Memoriam. 1881 Oxford, printed at the University Press. Lanrick. A Game for 2 Players. 1881 Oxford, printed at the University Press. A circular about the School of Dramatic Art. 1882 Oxford, printed at the University Press. An analysis of the responsions lists from 1882 Michaelmas, 1873, to Michaelmas, 1881. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Circular asking for suggestions for a girl's 1882 edition of Shakespeare. Oxford, printed at the University Press. 2 different forms, one pp2, the other pp. 4. Euclid, Books I and II. 1882 London, Macmillan. Printed in Oxford. pp 11 plus 108. 8vo cloth. 2s. 7 editions were subsequently published. Dreamland. A Song. Words by Lewis Carroll, music 1882 by Reverend C. E. Hutchinson. Oxford, printed at the University Press. Mischief. A game invented by the Reverend C. L. 1882 Dodgson. Oxford, printed at the University Press. 2 editions. Rhyme and Reason by Lewis Carroll, with 1883 6-5 illustrations by Arthur B. Frost, and 9 by Henry Holiday. London, Macmillan. pp 12 plus 214, cr. 8vo cloth, 7s. Now in its 6,000. This book is a reprint, with a few additions, of The Hunting of the Snook and of the comic portions of Phantasmagoria and other poems. Lawn tennis tournaments, the true method of 1883 assigning prizes, with a proof of the fallacy of the present method. London, Macmillan. Printed in Oxford. 8vo. Rules for reckoning postage. 1883 Oxford, Baxter. 12 months in a curatorship. 1884 by one who has tried it. Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 52, 8vo supplement to ditto. 1884 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 8, 8vo postscript to ditto. 1884 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 2, 8vo. Christmas Greetings. 1884 London, Macmillan. The Profits of Authorship. By Lewis Carroll. 1884 London, Macmillan. 8vo 6d. The Principles of Parliamentary Representation. 1884 London, Harrison. pp 56, 8vo. Reprinted in 1885. Supplement to ditto. 1885 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 8 vo. 2 editions. Postscript to supplement to ditto. 1885 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, 8 vo. 2 editions. Supplement to first edition of Euclid and his 1885 modern rivals. London, Macmillan. 8 vo. 1s. A Tangled Tale. By Lewis Carroll. With 6 1885 illustrations by Arthur B. Frost. London, Macmillan. Printed in Oxford. pp 152, cr. 8 vo. Cloth, gilt edges. 4s. 6d. Now in its 4,000. First appeared in Monthly Packet, April, 1882, November, 1884. There are also separate reprints of each knot and of the answers to knots I and 2. Proposed Procuratorial Cycle. 1885 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, 4-2. The Procuratorial Cycle. Further remarks. 1885 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 3, 4-2. Suggestions as to the election of proctors. 1885 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, 4-2. Reprinted, with additions, in 1886, Alice's Adventures Underground. By Lewis 1886 Carroll. With 37 illustrations by the author. London, Macmillan. pp 8 plus 95, cr. 8 vo. Cloth, gilt edges. 4s, now in its 4,000. This book is a facsimile of the original manuscript story, afterwards developed into Alice in Wonderland. 3 years in a curatorship. 1886 by one whom it has tried. Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 32, cr. 8 vo. Remarks on the report of the Finance Committee. 1886 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 8, cr. 8 vo. Remarks on Mr. Sampson's proposal. 1886 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, cr. 8 vo. Observations on Mr. Sampson's proposal. 1889 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 12, 8 vo. First paper on logic. 1886 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 2, 8 vo. Fourth paper on logic. 1886 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 3, 8 vo. Fifth paper on logic. 1887 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, 8 vo. Sixth paper on logic. 1887 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, 8 vo. Questions in Logic. 1887 Oxford, printed by E. Baxter. pp 4, fcap. Fol. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and Through the 1887 Looking Glass. People's Editions, 1 volume. London, Macmillan. Cr 8 vo. Cloth. 4s6d. The Game of Logic. By Lewis Carroll. 1887 London, Macmillan. pp 96, cr. 8 vo cloth. 3s. Curiosa Mathematica, Part I. A New Theory of 1888 Parallels. By C. L. Dodgson. London, Macmillan. pp 75. 8 vo cloth. 2s, reprinted in 1889, 1890, and 1895. Memoria Technica. Written with a cyclostyle dot. 1888 pp4 circular billiards for 2 players. Invented, in 1889-1889, by Lewis Carroll. 2 editions Sylvie and Bruno. By Lewis Carroll. With 1889 4-6 illustrations by Harry Furniss. London, Macmillan. pp 23 plus 400, cr. 8 vo cloth, gilt edges. Now in its 13th thousand. The picture on p77 was drawn by Miss Alice Havers. The Nursery Alice. Containing 20 coloured 1890 enlargements from Tenniel's illustrations to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. With text adapted to nursery readers by Lewis Carroll. The cover designed and coloured by E. Gertrude Thompson. London, Macmillan. pp 56, 4-2. Boards. 4s, now in its 11th thousand. 8 or 9 wise words about letter writing. 1890 by Lewis Carroll. Oxford, Imberlin and Son. Now in its 5th edition. This pamphlet is sold with the Wonderland postage stamp case, published by Messrs. Imberlin and Son. The Stranger's Circular. A leaflet sent by Mr. 1890 Dodgson to people who wrote to him about his Lewis Carroll books, addressing the envelope to Reverend C. L. Dodgson. Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Circular, asking friends to send addresses of 1890 stationers likely to sell the Wonderland postage stamp case. Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Circular sent to various hospitals, offering free 1890 copies of Lewis Carroll's books. Oxford, printed by Shepherd. List of institutions to which above was to be sent. 1890 Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Circular, addressed to the governing body of 1891 Christ Church, Oxford, about the proposal to invite M.S. to dine at high table. A Postal Problem. June, 1891. 1891 Ditto, Supplement. 1891 A circular about resignation of curatorship. 1892 Oxford, printed by Shepherd. A circular about unparliamentary words 1892 used by some competitors in the Syzyges competition in the Lady. Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Curiosissima Curatoria. By Rude Donatus. 1892, a pamphlet sent to all resident members of Christ Church Common Room. Oxford, printed by Shepherd. 8th paper on logic. 1892 Oxford, printed by Shepherd. A revised version of one page was printed in same year. 9th paper on logic. 1892 Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Notes to logic papers 8 and 9. 1892 Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Curiosa Mathematica, Part 3. Pillow Problems 1893 thought out during wakeful hours, by C. L. Dodgson. London, Macmillan, printed in Oxford. pp 17 + 109, 8vo. Cloth, 1st and 2nd editions. Reprinted in 1894, 1895. Syzyges and Lanrick. By Lewis Carroll. 1893 London, The Lady Office. pp 26. 6d. Sylvie and Bruno Concluded. By Lewis Carroll. 1893 with 46 illustrations by Harry Furness. London, Macmillan. pp xz + 423, cr. 8vo cloth, gilt edges. 7s.6d, now in its third thousand. The picture on p. 409 was drawn by Miss Alice Havers. A disputed point in logic. 1894 What the Tortoise Said to Achilles. Reprinted 1894 from Mind, December, 1894. pp 4. A fascinating mental recreation for the young. 1895, a circular about symbolic logic, signed Lewis Carroll. Resident women students. 1896, a circular, signed Charles L. Dodgson. Oxford, printed by Shepherd. Symbolic Logic. Part I Elementary. By Lewis 1896 Carroll. London, Macmillan. pp xz + 100.